Welcome to my review of Hudson's Adventure Island. This game took me around 15 hours and 42 minutes to beat. And this is definitely a well-known game that's pretty notorious for its challenge. It's definitely a hard game. I do think in some ways that it is, overhyped in the challenge department. I have heard it mentioned to be harder than Battletoads, which to me, I don't agree with that. But it does have 4 very difficult parts. Now here you want to get this Hudson B on the end of the first stage. That will give you unlimited continues for the rest of the game. And, it's not really a cheat because it's in the instruction manual, so I would say it's legit. But there are no saves. But of course, I played on an emulator and I didn't use it to cheat. I just used the save states to practice. Here you're going to see a little demonstration of how all the bosses are pretty much identical. They just swap out the heads. And the backgrounds are a different color, but that's about it. But aside from that, you have identical boss fights, but they just take more hits. They have more hit points as you get farther into the game. But it's the exact same pattern, very simple pattern. That's really all there is to all the bosses in the game. The game does have slippery control, as if you're on ice all the time, and the hit detection, it's not great. A lot of times your projectiles will go through some of the enemies, especially the frogs. So there are issues, with those things that keep it from being the tightest game. So now for this part of the video, I'm going to showcase the hardest stages of the game, just to show how hard the game gets. This is the first really hard stage. This is stage 7-4. And this is where the game really spikes. So this is going to be the first big challenge. And when I first got to this stage, I believe it took me a little bit over 2 hours just to beat this stage. So this was where the game really started to get difficult. The problem is that once you get to this point in the game does something where it stops giving you weapons for certain stages and requires you to basically do a pacifist run of the stages. That's where the game really gets difficult, and it is a questionable design decision. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it is kind of a shitty design aspect of the game, though it does make the game a good challenge game to beat, just as a hard game to beat, but as far as good game design, I wouldn't consider that a good game design to start removing weapons on some of the later stages and making it so that you just have to purely dodge everything, as you see I'm doing here with no weapons until you get to the boss. But it makes for a lot of crazy shit you have to do as far as some really bizarre timings with some of the jumps on some stages. There's two jumps in the game that have an insane illogical timing to them that really took me a while to be able to even get them a few times in practice, let alone do them consistently. But of course I only had to do them once to beat the stage, given that I would complete it and then beat the stage successfully. So I was relying on the fact that, if I practiced it enough, I'd be able to do it eventually and break through. So here is a full boss fight, since I'm showing these stages, and you'll see a few of them in the video. It's the same as the first boss, it just takes more hits. So that's really all it is. You have a button that you hold down to run, and when you hold that button down, your jumps are going to be higher too. If you want to do a shorter jump, don't run and just hit jump. You'll do a little hop. And aside from that, there's a button to, if you mash the run button, you'll throw your hammers or fireballs, depending on what you have. And that's pretty much it for the controls. If you're on the skateboard, you can brake a little bit by holding back, but the skateboard is not a great item to get unless you're a speedrunner, because it makes the levels much more dangerous. It's much harder to control. So it's not ideal, because this game, it's designed to be very trolly. It's a troll kind of game is what it is. And it has kind of slippery controls, and, they try to fuck you over a lot by putting shit, in the worst possible location when you jump. There's going to be a rock there or a fire or something like that in your way to try to fuck you over. Everything is kind of designed in a intentional way to try to fuck you over, more so than most games even from this time period. So while the game can be pretty challenging, it didn't give me too much trouble, but on the earlier stages it didn't give me too much trouble. Like I said, I am well versed in these games, but I had a lot of trouble when it came to the harder stages. So it kind of spikes out of nowhere once you get to 7-4. Not that the game was easy before that, but it gets to a high degree of difficulty spike from what the rest of the game was when you get to 7-4. That's going to be the real test. If you can beat 7-4, then if you stick with the game and use safe state practice to learn some of those crazy jumps, you can probably beat the rest of the game, but it's going to be tough. But 7-4 is your first real test, so if you can beat that, then that's a good sign. And I will post a link to my tutorial when it's done. I'll have that in the description so you can check that out. I haven't recorded that yet, but that's going to break down my strats the best I can. It's almost going to be more like a playthrough with commentary because it's very hard to break everything down movement by movement, you know. It does get very crazy near the end of the game. And it's a pretty fast-moving game. It's almost designed like a speedrun game because your health is constantly draining. It's like a timer, but it's a very short timer, and the only way to keep it full is to keep collecting fruit, which in some stages you're going to be cutting it very close and you really have to collect it, or you will die. But you do get checkpoints in the stages. There's 4 checkpoint signs in each stage. They're marked by numbers, and you've probably seen them by now. If you're paying attention, you'll see those. And whenever you lose a life, you start at the checkpoint sign. But if you lose all your lives, then you got to use that continue B. Now, this is the hardest stage in the game. And you do have unlimited continues if you use that B. If you don't use that special item, you have no continues. So that is up to you. But yeah, this is the hardest stage in the game. You can see it's already very dense. You got that slippery control. Everything is pretty much designed to fuck you over after you make a jump or something like that. But the worst part is going to be, one particular jump has a really weird timing. I believe it's that one I just died on. It looks like a regular jump, but when you play it, you'll see that there's a super bizarre timing to it that doesn't make any sense. And it was so difficult that I couldn't even do it by trying to make a mental marker of where to jump and when to jump. I just had to burn it into my memory by doing it again and again by feel. It's that jump right there that I just survived. So it's kind of hard, but you will see you'll notice it because it's the one that I died on. So, if you saw me die just now, a little while ago, that was the jump. And it's extremely difficult. But, of course, everything is doable, but again, you have to do a pacifist run on these hardest stages because they don't give you a weapon. So either you're going to bring your weapon from the previous stage and carry it all the way through on your first time trying the stage, or you just have to be familiar with the stage and have practiced it in the past. But if not, you're most likely going to lose the weapon as I did, and you're going to have to do all these stages pacifist style with no weapon. Which, like I said, is not really a good design decision. It just feels kind of a sloppy design decision by the developers. The game also kind of feels untested in certain ways on these stages with some of the timings and jumps and things like that. It feels almost like they just threw it together and said, fuck it. We'll just let the player deal with it. Or they just assume that the player is never going to lose their weapon. Either way, but it doesn't feel like it was really tested. It almost feels like they made a mistake and forgot to add the weapons in for those 4 stages, but it's kind of weird to have the same mistake 4 times. So I'm guessing it was probably intentional or just wasn't well tested. Not that they would have to care too much because not a lot of players are necessarily going to get near the end of the game anyway, so maybe they didn't give a shit. But either way, it did feel sloppy. As far as the gameplay and the layout goes, like I said, the controls and everything are not the tightest, but you get used to them, but they're still not great. But as far as the layout and the enemies, there's not a huge variety of enemies, and basically what the game does, it's mixing and matching all the enemies in different arrangements throughout, which is what a lot of old games do, but it doesn't do it in a real, it does it in cheap ways mostly, and it doesn't really feel great. It feels kind of like they're always trying to fuck you over, which is kind of the design philosophy of the game, is to try to always fuck you over with something that's in your way or going to cause a problem. So that's kind of the design of the game, which you could say that about a lot of games, but it never gets it's not the most exciting design layout. It's not like Super Mario Brothers 3. If you want to see a great layout to the stages that's exciting, this is kind of like the same thing again and again with a few different arrangements of where things are placed, and it's a lot of recycled content, basically. You have pretty much the same backgrounds that repeat again and again from world to world. You just have different enemy arrangements, and maybe some color palette swaps and stuff in the background just to make it look a little different, maybe, but at the most. But I don't even know if they bother to do that. It's really similar backgrounds, and The layouts, the enemies you face, and everything are pretty much the same. So now coming up, this is the hardest, this is the hardest jump in the game. This part right here coming up after this flame right here. It's going to be the 7th platform, I believe. It's a ridiculous bad timing. I probably died on it again. I think it's that one. Because these are my actual stage runs from my playthrough, my successful run of the stage. And, I would have some deaths usually on the harder ones. So the deaths are shown, but I don't show, I only show deaths where progress was made. As far as, like, if I lost, a whole continue, which there isn't any continues, but, you have infinite continues. But if I went out to the continue screen, then I edited out all those lives that were lost. I just show the successful set of lives that I beat the stage on. But that jump is insane. It's hard to really see that in the video, but it's one of those things you have to play. And I'm not even going to be able to describe it too well. It was done by feel. And I kept practicing it again and again with save states, isolated save state practice, actually using a foot pedal to load states really fast and also to save states in various areas so I don't have to keep going to the keyboard. And it makes me able to load states rapidly and really, really practice again and again the same parts without having to take my hands off the controller. So it's another useful tool that I use now for these type of difficult games. And difficulty-wise, I would rank this game, maybe it's kind of in the vicinity of Ninja Gaiden 3 for NES, though. It has some of the hardest sections of any NES game that I played, as far as those few sections. But the overall game is really not that hard. At least it wasn't for me, but those sections are very, very hard. So it kind of puts it up in that range. You could say maybe it's about as hard as Ninja Gaiden 3, which also took me around 16 hours in that range. But for me, Ninja Gaiden 3 was a little bit harder only because I fucking hate limited continues when I got to start the game over and redo shit I beat. I'm really fucking impatient, so that game was harder for me. But you could say that this game is maybe a little bit harder just because it has sections that Ninja Gaiden 3 can't touch in terms of difficulty. And, if you can't beat those brick wall sections, you're not going to beat this game. So you do have to, get past those. And then you have to beat the rest of the stage as well, not just those single sections. So, I might give the edge to this in difficulty. But I wouldn't put it anywhere near Battletoads. I find Battletoads to be an extremely tedious trial and error overall kind of experience, and I really don't like the control in that game. I like the control better in this game than I do in Battletoads, for whatever reason. Not to say that I don't think either one has very good control, but this one, for whatever reason, it's like, it feels like a game that I'm more interested in working on and playing. I just couldn't get into Battletoads. But yeah, you can see how they place these rocks in a really bad fucking space. And some of these spider jumps, there's a few jumps between that spiders, like in 7-4 and 8-4, that are really, really hard. But of course, you're seeing me after I've already practiced and beat these sections, so you're not seeing me struggle on them. If you look at some of my practice sessions that I posted up and things like that, you'll see me dying for over an hour on some of these parts. But, this footage is from my playthrough, my successful playthrough, so there's not a ton of deaths in this. Again, you see the final boss is exactly the same as all the other bosses. Just takes a lot more hits. But yeah, overall for me, I would probably give this game a 6 out of 10 because I got to take into account, all 2D platformers, including, indie games that are out now that take advantage of, the new technology, but they also kind of stick to the old style and they do it really well. And of course, the old games like Super Mario Bros. 3, Donkey Kong Country 2, all these games blow it away. It's really just I would call it a decent platforming game. But I wouldn't really call it a good platformer, and I definitely wouldn't call it great. I think it's a decent game. I do think it's a nice game to try to beat just for the challenge and accomplishment of beating it, but not as hard as it's hyped up to be, but still very hard. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.